Jennie Jerome was born on the 9th of January 1854, in Brooklyn, New York, into the prominent and affluent household of Leonard Jerome, a financier known for his influence in Gilded Age New York. Today, she is best known globally as the mother of Winston Churchill, Britain's wartime prime minister, and as an early example of the American heiress who crossed the Atlantic to marry into the British aristocracy. But before Jennie Jerome became Lady Randolph Churchill, before her story was seen as an Anglo-American union shaping modern history, she was the subject of scrutiny and skepticism in Victorian England. Arriving in London in 1873, Jennie challenged entrenched expectations of British high society, blending the informality and ambition of her American upbringing with the rituals and constraints of the British upper class. Her marriage to Lord Randolph Churchill brought new wealth to a storied title but also sparked controversy, negotiating a tense balance between money and heritage, gender and power. This is the factual account of Jennie Jerome's trajectory. Her early life in New York, transatlantic marriage, economic strategies, political and social entanglements, personal scandals, and the shaping of a political dynasty through both crisis and reinvention. Before we begin, please comment where in the world you're watching from. I'd love to know that this story is being watched from all around the globe. Jennie Jerome was born on the 9th of January 1854, in Brooklyn, New York, at a time when the city was rapidly consolidating its role as a financial and commercial center of the United States. Her birth occurred within a household already embedded in the emerging elite of mid-19th century New York. Her father, Leonard Jerome, was a stock speculator and investor whose activities were closely tied to Wall Street's expanding markets during the pre-Civil War and post-war periods. His business dealings placed the Jerome family among a class of Americans whose wealth was recent, visible, and subject to market volatility rather than inherited land or titles. The Jerome household reflected these conditions. The family maintained residences in Brooklyn and later Manhattan, including a prominent home on Madison Avenue, situating them within the social geography of New York's upper class. Leonard Jerome was known for hosting large social gatherings, concerts, and dinners that attracted financiers, politicians, and cultural figures. These events were not incidental. They functioned as strategic tools for maintaining influence and visibility within a competitive social environment. Jennie grew up observing how reputation, hospitality, and access operated as forms of social capital. Her mother, Clara Hall Jerome, managed the domestic structure of the family and emphasized formal education and discipline. Jennie received private instruction and spent extended periods in Europe, including time in France, where she acquired fluency in French and familiarity with continental customs. This education distinguished her from many of her American contemporaries and aligned her upbringing with families who anticipated transatlantic futures for their children. These preparations were deliberate and reflected the Jerome family's awareness of shifting opportunities beyond the United States. Leonard Jerome's financial position, while substantial, was not immune to economic downturns. His investments fluctuated during periods of market instability, particularly following the Civil War and during the financial contractions of the late 1862s and early 1872s. These reversals introduced uncertainty into the family's long-term security. The consequences were practical rather than theoretical. Maintaining status required continued income, and declining liquidity increased pressure on family strategies related to marriage and social alignment. By the early 1872s, this context shaped decisions concerning Jennie's future. American wealth, when paired with European titles, had become an increasingly common solution to such pressures. The Jerome family was not isolated in this practice. Across New York society, industrialists and financiers sought aristocratic connections for their daughters, while British noble families faced declining estate revenues and rising maintenance costs. These parallel conditions created a transactional environment in which marriage functioned as an economic and social instrument. Jennie's upbringing made her a suitable candidate for this role. She possessed the education, confidence, and social training necessary to navigate elite environments. Her exposure to European society had already reduced the cultural distance between American and British norms. At the same time, her American background carried associations of wealth and independence that distinguished her from traditional British debutantes. By 1873, when Jennie traveled to England, the foundations of her later life had already been established. Her family's position, education, and financial circumstances converged to place her at the center of a broader transatlantic exchange between American capital and British aristocracy. These conditions did not guarantee acceptance or success, but they defined the structural framework within which her subsequent marriage and social trajectory would unfold. By the early 1872s, the practice of American heiresses marrying into European aristocratic families had moved from sporadic occurrence to a recognized social and economic phenomenon. This trend was shaped by converging conditions: the accumulation of new wealth by American industrialists and financiers, the declining revenues of British and European landed estates, and the increasing openness of transatlantic social networks. The term "dollar princesses" emerged to describe the daughters of affluent Americans who entered marriages not solely for romance but for titles, estates, and access to traditional European social hierarchies. This process reflected pragmatic calculations on both sides, with financial stability exchanged for social prestige. The Jerome family was directly affected by these currents. Leonard Jerome's financial setbacks during periods of market volatility reinforced the need for strategic alliances. By 1872, the value of aligning with British aristocracy had become apparent in New York's elite circles. American families such as the Jeromes viewed European marriages as a means to secure transgenerational advancement. These arrangements were supported by a developing infrastructure of transatlantic travel, diplomatic connections, and cultural adaptation, which facilitated both negotiations and social integration. Jennie Jerome's education and upbringing positioned her advantageously within this framework. She had acquired fluency in French and experience with continental customs during family sojourns in Paris, where the Jeromes engaged with diplomatic and aristocratic circles during the Second Empire. These extended stays were neither accidental nor merely leisurely. They provided practical training in manners, language, and the informal codes that governed European courtship and social display. The knowledge Jennie gained during these periods would later prove essential to her efforts to navigate the distinct norms of British high society. The emergence of American heiresses as a social force altered expectations for women of Jennie's background. Families anticipated that their daughters would play public roles as intermediaries between American economic interests and European traditions. This expectation required adaptability and an ability to manage complex cultural negotiations. The transatlantic marriages of the period were frequently scrutinized by both American and British observers, generating commentary about the motivations, suitability, and long-term implications of these unions. The transactional nature of these relationships was not concealed. Marriage settlements and dowries were openly negotiated, and the success of such alliances was often measured by the ability to maintain estates or restore family fortunes. Jennie's preparation for this role was both formal and informal. Her education encompassed not only languages and literature but also an understanding of protocol and the management of household affairs. These skills were viewed as prerequisites for integration into British aristocratic households, where the expectations for women included the supervision of staff, hosting of social events, and maintenance of family reputation. The decision to pursue a British match was informed by these considerations and by the broader patterns observable among the families in their social network. By the time Jennie Jerome reached adulthood, the strategic framework for transatlantic marriage was established. Her circumstances were representative of a larger movement among American elites to secure status and influence on an international stage. The intersection of American ambition and European tradition created a dynamic environment that would define the trajectory of Jennie's life and the structural conditions into which she would marry. These developments set the stage for her subsequent encounter with Lord Randolph Churchill, the consequences of which would reverberate through both family history and Anglo-American relations for decades to follow. In August 1873, Jennie Jerome traveled to the Isle of Wight to attend the Cowes Regatta, a preeminent social and sporting event on the British calendar. The regatta drew members of the aristocracy, diplomats, and foreign guests, providing a venue for both formal and informal introductions among elite families. It was in this setting that Jennie met Lord Randolph Churchill, the second son of the 7th Duke of Marlborough. The encounter marked the convergence of transatlantic interests and personal ambition, underscoring the social mobility available to American heiresses of substantial means and preparation. The meeting at Cowes was not arranged by accident. Both the Jerome and Churchill families participated in the network of introductions and hospitality that governed high society in the late Victorian era. Jennie's presence at Cowes was facilitated by her family's prior integration into European circles, while Lord Randolph's attendance reflected the expectation that younger sons of the aristocracy would seek suitable matches at such gatherings. The attraction between Jennie and Lord Randolph was noted by contemporaries and reported in later accounts as immediate and significant, though the context was one of careful negotiation and strategic interest. Within days of their introduction, Jennie and Lord Randolph became engaged. The speed of this development generated concern among both families. Leonard Jerome and the Duke of Marlborough initiated discussions to determine the terms of the marriage, including financial settlements, dowries, and ongoing support. These negotiations reflected the reality that British aristocratic titles often lacked liquidity, while American fortunes, though ample, did not convey the same social legitimacy as inherited land or peerage. The discussions resulted in a contract that specified the conditions of the union, establishing the economic framework that would govern the couple's early years. The engagement also raised questions about nationality, religious differences, and social compatibility. The Jeromes were Americans of recent wealth, while the Churchills represented centuries of established British lineage. Jennie's Catholic background was a point of discussion in a predominantly Anglican aristocracy, though it was ultimately decided that she would convert to facilitate her integration. Social observers in London and New York commented on the alliance, interpreting it variously as a coup for the Jeromes or a sign of financial necessity for the Churchills. The transaction was analyzed in the press and in private correspondence, illustrating the degree to which such marriages were subject to public scrutiny. The wedding was scheduled for the 15th of April 1874 and took place at the British Embassy in Paris. The choice of Paris reflected both logistical considerations and the family's existing ties to the city. The ceremony was attended by close family members and select diplomats, with neither of the couple's fathers present, reportedly due to business and travel complications. The absence of both patriarchs underscored the practical realities that often governed such alliances, in which personal preference was balanced against financial and social imperatives. The marriage of Jennie Jerome and Lord Randolph Churchill marked the formal beginning of her integration into British aristocracy. The event was reported in both American and British newspapers, which noted the infusion of American wealth into an old and distinguished title. For Jennie, the wedding signified entry into a new and highly regulated social environment, where every action would be evaluated according to standards she had not fully encountered in New York or Paris. The consequences of this union would extend beyond the personal, shaping the finances, reputation, and future prospects of both the Jerome and Churchill families as they navigated the evolving structures of late 19th century transatlantic society. Following her marriage in April 1874, Jennie Jerome relocated to Blenheim Palace, the ancestral home of the Churchill family located in Oxfordshire. Blenheim, completed in the early 18th century and designated as a monument to the Duke of Marlborough's victory at the Battle of Blenheim, functioned as a symbol of enduring aristocratic tradition. For Jennie, the transition from American social circles and continental sophistication to the rigid structures of British estate life required significant adaptation. The protocols, hierarchies, and daily routines of Blenheim represented a continuity of British peerage practices, in contrast to the relative fluidity of American society. Jennie's early months at Blenheim were shaped by immediate challenges. The Churchill family's social standing was unquestioned, but the practical realities of managing a large estate with limited liquid resources soon became evident. The property required substantial maintenance and staffing, with expenditures far outstripping regular income. Jennie's new mother-in-law, the Duchess of Marlborough, presided over domestic affairs and maintained strict adherence to established protocols. Her authority within the household underscored the expectation that Jennie would learn and conform to the customs of her adopted environment rather than introduce innovations associated with her American upbringing. The expectations placed on Jennie were comprehensive. As Lady Randolph Churchill, She was responsible for overseeing a household staff, orchestrating formal dinners, and participating in a calendar of social obligations that included local charity events, hunting parties, and visits from neighboring families. Her conduct was subject to scrutiny by both family members and the broader community. Even small deviations from protocol, such as addressing staff by first names or introducing informal customs from New York, were noted and sometimes criticized. The aristocratic society into which Jennie had married was resistant to change and cautious in its reception of outsiders. Jennie's attempts to integrate were further complicated by the attitude of the local gentry and peerage. Invitations to prominent social functions were not always extended, and when they were, Jennie's presence was sometimes regarded with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. The British press, attentive to the novelty of an American heiress in a historic title, published frequent commentaries on Jennie's dress, manners, and suitability. These reports circulated among London and regional readers, contributing to an atmosphere of heightened observation and evaluation. Financial limitations shaped Jennie's experience at Blenheim. The Churchills' position required the outward display of wealth through hospitality and participation in the rituals of the aristocracy, but the actual means to support these activities were often insufficient. Jennie was expected to uphold appearances, maintain household standards, and avoid any suggestion of decline. The disparity between public image and private circumstance was a recurring theme in the lives of many aristocratic families of the era, and Jennie's resourcefulness in managing these constraints was soon put to the test. Despite these difficulties, Jennie's background provided some advantages. Her education, familiarity with European languages, and experience in international social circles enabled her to communicate effectively with diplomats, visiting dignitaries, and members of the cosmopolitan elite. She established her own routines and networks within the larger framework of the estate, finding allies among staff and select family members. Over time, Jennie developed strategies to balance compliance with tradition and the preservation of her individuality. The period at Blenheim marked a formative stage in Jennie's acclimatization to British aristocratic life. The process required the negotiation of identity, status, and expectations amid an environment resistant to external influences. Jennie's capacity to adapt while managing persistent financial and social pressures established patterns that would recur throughout her subsequent career as Lady Randolph Churchill. The consequences of this adjustment period extended beyond the household, shaping her future roles in London society and influencing the trajectory of the Churchill family as it confronted the changing realities of the late 19th century. On the 30th of November 1874, less than 8 months after her marriage, Jennie Jerome gave birth to her first child, Winston Leonard Spencer Churchill, at Blenheim Palace. The birth, which occurred prematurely, immediately added a new dimension to Jennie's responsibilities as Lady Randolph Churchill. In the context of the British aristocracy, the arrival of a male heir was both a familial event and a matter of dynastic continuity, securing the Churchill line's future prospects and establishing Jennie's position within the family. Documentation of the birth, including medical accounts and family correspondence, confirmed the urgency and gravity with which the delivery was managed, reflecting prevailing concerns about the health of both mother and child. The early care of Winston Churchill followed practices typical among upper-class families of the period, with a reliance on nurses and governesses for daily supervision. Nevertheless, Jennie's involvement diverged in several respects from conventional aristocratic norms. While many mothers of her rank delegated significant authority to household staff, Jennie took an active interest in her son's development, frequently intervening in matters of education, discipline, and health. Surviving letters from Jennie to Winston and to her husband indicate a pattern of engagement that blended American informality with the expectations of British peerage. Jennie's approach to motherhood was shaped by her transatlantic background. Having been raised in a family where maternal presence was visible and communication valued, Jennie sought to instill similar qualities in her children. She promoted reading, conversation, and exposure to the arts, insisting on a rigorous educational regime that prepared Winston for the competitive environments he would later encounter. This contrasted with the often distant relationships typical of many aristocratic families, where children might see their parents primarily during formal occasions or holidays. The demands of Jennie's social role, however, imposed limitations on the frequency and duration of her direct involvement. Participation in London's social season, the management of estate affairs, and frequent travel, both domestic and international, resulted in extended periods of separation from her son. During these absences, Jennie maintained a correspondence that has since been preserved in family archives, providing evidence of her sustained influence and emotional presence despite physical distance. Her letters conveyed advice, encouragement, and at times explicit instructions to tutors and staff regarding Winston's upbringing. The birth of a second son, John Strange Spencer Churchill, in 1880 further expanded Jennie's maternal responsibilities. The presence of two sons created new considerations regarding inheritance, education, and social positioning. Jennie sought to balance the contrasting needs of her children while navigating the evolving expectations of British society in the final decades of the 19th century. Her American identity remained a factor in shaping both her parenting style and the reception she received among her British peers. Public interest in the Churchill family intensified as Winston progressed from infancy to adolescence. His precociousness and later accomplishments drew attention to Jennie's role as a mother, with contemporaries and later biographers noting her influence in fostering ambition and resilience. Documentation from the period, including reports from schoolmasters and family friends, supported the conclusion that Jennie's involvement had a measurable impact on her son's early development and outlook. By the late 1880s, Jennie's position as the mother of a future political figure began to acquire retrospective significance, though at the time her primary concern remained the immediate welfare and advancement of her children. The experience of motherhood, undertaken in the context of a prominent yet financially constrained aristocratic household, required Jennie to balance competing demands on her time, resources, and attention. These patterns of maternal engagement and strategic guidance established a foundation for the Churchill family's public and private trajectories, contributing to the enduring reputation of both Jennie and her sons in British and international history. The relationship between Jennie Jerome and Lord Randolph Churchill evolved in the decade following their marriage, shaped by the demands of aristocratic life, political ambition, and the economic pressures endemic to many landed families of the era. By 1875, the Churchills had established themselves as active participants in London society, their presence reinforced by Lord Randolph's entry into politics as a Member of Parliament for Woodstock. Jennie's early years as Lady Randolph Churchill were marked by her energetic support of her husband's ambitions, providing organizational skill and social acumen as he pursued advancement within the Conservative Party. Collaboration within the marriage was evident in a variety of domains. Jennie hosted political salons at their residence, bringing together influential party figures, journalists, and intellectuals for discussions that blurred the boundaries between personal and public spheres. Her ability to manage complex guest lists and facilitate introductions contributed directly to Lord Randolph's efforts to build alliances within the fractious environment of late Victorian parliamentary politics. Party records and correspondence from the period confirm that Jennie's reputation for discretion and intelligence was noted by several leading conservatives, including Lord Salisbury and Arthur Balfour. Despite these strengths, the marriage was frequently tested by economic strain. The Churchill family's financial situation, already precarious, became more complex as Lord Randolph's political responsibilities increased. The cost of maintaining multiple households, supporting social obligations, and funding election campaigns outpaced income from the family's estates. Jennie was often required to negotiate with creditors, manage household accounts, and seek supplemental funds from her American relatives. These practical burdens introduced stress and, at times, disagreement over priorities and expenditures. Personal tensions also surfaced, fueled by differences in temperament and social expectation. Lord Randolph's reserved demeanor contrasted with Jennie's sociability and preference for cosmopolitan company. Rumors of extramarital relationships circulated in both society and the press, affecting the couple's reputation but rarely acknowledged directly in correspondence or public statements. The couple's relationship was characterized by alternating periods of solidarity and distance, with documented instances of mutual support punctuated by evidence of emotional withdrawal. Lord Randolph's health emerged as a further source of difficulty by the late 1880s. His abrupt changes in mood, declining physical condition, and eventual diagnosis with a degenerative illness now widely believed to have been a form of syphilis or a neurological disorder required Jennie to assume increasing responsibility for household management and public appearances. Medical records and family correspondence document the gradual withdrawal of Lord Randolph from active social and political life, and Jennie's adaptation to a more independent role. Notwithstanding these challenges, Jennie maintained her commitment to sustaining the family's position in society. She continued to organize events, manage correspondence, and advocate for her husband's interests when his health or political circumstances required. This period witnessed the gradual emergence of Jennie as a semi-autonomous figure within elite British circles, her reputation shaped as much by her ability to manage adversity as by her earlier successes as a political hostess. By the close of the 1880 seconds, the marriage between Jennie and Lord Randolph Churchill had become both a partnership of necessity and a case study in the adaptive strategies required of aristocratic families facing financial, social, and personal pressures. The collaborative elements of their union, forged in the early years of mutual ambition, gave way to arrangements based on shared interests, reputation management, and the pragmatic division of labor. These developments set the stage for the new challenges that would follow Lord Randolph's declining health and eventual death, while further establishing Jennie's identity as a figure capable of navigating the intersecting demands of family, society, and public life. By the 1880 seconds, Jennie Jerome's presence in London society had attracted the persistent attention of both established newspapers and the expanding tabloid press. The combination of her American origins, distinctive fashion, and visibility within elite social circles made her a frequent subject for commentary and, at times, criticism. The British media landscape was undergoing significant change during this period, with new forms of mass-market journalism amplifying personal stories and circulating rumors at a scale unprecedented in earlier decades. Jennie, as Lady Randolph Churchill, became an emblematic figure in debates about propriety, influence, and the boundaries of acceptable conduct among the aristocracy. Reports on Jennie's activities routinely appeared in publications such as The Times, the Pall Mall Gazette, and society periodicals that specialized in chronicling the movements of notable individuals. Accounts focused on her hosting of political salons, attendance at prominent social events, and her relationships with figures including the Prince of Wales, later Edward VII. These public associations generated commentary regarding her influence in conservative circles and fueled speculation about her role in shaping political opinions within her husband's network. The documented invitations, guest lists, and surviving press clippings provide a record of Jennie's centrality to the era's elite gatherings. With increased scrutiny came the challenge of managing reputational risk. Jennie's American background and independent comportment were sometimes interpreted as evidence of unconventional behavior, particularly in contrast to British expectations for aristocratic women. Society columnists frequently remarked on her attire, use of cosmetics, and conversational openness, sometimes framing her conduct as a transgression against the norms of discretion and reserve. Letters and diary entries from contemporaries reveal that these judgments were not merely a matter of public curiosity, but could affect access to exclusive events and networks. Allegations of impropriety, including rumors of romantic involvement with prominent men, circulated both privately and in coded references within the press. The rise of the illustrated press and society photography further contributed to the blurring of public and private boundaries. Jennie responded by cultivating alliances with sympathetic journalists, engaging in carefully worded rebuttals when necessary, and relying on her social networks to shield her from the more damaging effects of rumor. Her approach to reputation management emphasized strategic communication rather than outright denial, reflecting a pragmatic recognition of the limits of control in an increasingly mediated society. Financial considerations intersected with questions of public image. The need to maintain appearances despite constrained resources sometimes led to speculation about the sources of the Churchills' income, as well as the propriety of Jennie's travel and expenditures. American newspapers, particularly those with connections to the Jerome family's social network, occasionally published accounts defending Jennie or recontextualizing her activities for a transatlantic audience. The resulting discourse revealed the extent to which her identity was constructed in negotiation with both British and American media. By the late 1880s, the accumulation of press coverage and public commentary had solidified Jennie's status as both a social innovator and a controversial figure. The management of her reputation required continuous vigilance, adaptability, and engagement with the realities of an evolving media environment. This experience with scrutiny and rumor would inform Jennie's subsequent navigation of more serious challenges, including her husband's political decline and her increasing independence. The skills developed in responding to public judgment would remain central to her strategy for survival and relevance within the volatile world of late Victorian aristocracy. In the years following her establishment within British society, Jennie Jerome, now Lady Randolph Churchill, emerged as a significant, though unofficial, political actor within the Conservative Party's social infrastructure. From the mid-1870s onward, her London residence and drawing rooms became regular venues for gatherings that brought together members of Parliament, party leaders, journalists, diplomats, and financiers. The organization of these political salons was a strategic exercise, with guest lists calibrated to foster discussion, solidify alliances, and facilitate introductions among individuals whose support was essential to Lord Randolph Churchill's advancement. Records from the period confirm that Jennie maintained an active correspondence with key political figures, arranging meetings and relaying information on issues of parliamentary debate and government policy. Her transatlantic background, language skills, and familiarity with continental customs contributed to her reputation as a cosmopolitan intermediary. In correspondence preserved in party archives, figures such as Lord Salisbury and Arthur Balfour acknowledge Jennie's role in shaping the environment in which political alliances were negotiated. These relationships, while often conducted within the private sphere of domestic hospitality, influenced decision-making processes at the highest levels. Jennie's activities were not limited to social coordination. She took an interest in party strategy, regularly engaging with Lord Randolph on matters ranging from campaign organization to the timing of speeches and public appearances. Letters between the couple, as well as entries in her own diaries, reveal a partnership that extended beyond personal support into the realm of political collaboration. Jennie was credited with offering practical advice regarding the selection of parliamentary candidates and the development of messages for different constituencies. She also provided feedback on the content and tone of speeches, informed by her direct knowledge of the social and political climate. Her American connections were valuable assets in facilitating the flow of information and ideas between Britain and the United States. During visits to New York and Paris, Jennie met with journalists, business leaders, and former diplomatic acquaintances, returning with insights on transatlantic issues including trade, immigration, and the evolving position of the British Empire in world affairs. This network extended the reach of the Conservative Party and contributed to the modernization of its approach to international relations. Jennie's involvement in political life was not without controversy. Detractors within the Conservative Party and the broader aristocracy questioned the appropriateness of her influence, expressing concern that her informal role blurred established boundaries between public and private spheres. The gendered dimensions of this skepticism were evident in press commentary and private correspondence, which sometimes depicted Jennie's political engagement as a deviation from acceptable norms for women of her status. Nonetheless, her continued presence and the results she achieved for Lord Randolph's career mitigated the force of such criticism. The consequences of Jennie's political work became apparent as Lord Randolph Churchill rose to positions of increasing responsibility, including his appointment as Chancellor of the Exchequer in 1886. The networks, alliances, and reputation that had been assembled over more than a decade of activity played a direct role in supporting his advancement. At the same time, the visibility and expectations associated with this influence required Jennie to exercise continuous judgment and discretion. Her participation in political life set precedents for the informal yet consequential roles played by elite women in British public affairs, a development that would have lasting implications for the structure of power in the late Victorian and Edwardian periods. Throughout her marriage and subsequent life within the British aristocracy, Jennie Jerome faced ongoing financial challenges that were characteristic of many titled families in the latter half of the 19th century. The Churchill family, despite its prestigious lineage and the grandeur of Blenheim Palace, contended with a persistent gap between inherited expectations and available resources. From the mid-1870s onward, Jennie assumed increasing responsibility for the practical management of household finances, a role shaped by both necessity and her upbringing in a business-oriented American household. The Churchill estates, while symbolically central to the family's identity, required extensive upkeep. Maintenance costs for the property, combined with the expenses of social obligations and the support of a sizable domestic staff, routinely exceeded the income generated by agricultural rents and traditional sources. Estate accounts and correspondence from this period document repeated shortfalls, with creditors and suppliers pressing for payment. The inability to liquidate land holdings without undermining the family's social standing limited the range of options available to Jennie and Lord Randolph. Jennie's financial management strategies drew on her familiarity with American business practices and networks. She tracked expenditures, negotiated with tradesmen, and sought to leverage her connections to secure advantageous credit or arrange loans. On several occasions, Jennie turned to her father, Leonard Jerome, for financial support, either in the form of direct transfers or through intermediaries in New York's financial community. Family letters reveal both the frequency and urgency of these requests, as well as the limits of transatlantic assistance during periods of broader economic contraction. To supplement household income and meet the rising costs of social participation, Jennie adopted additional measures. She organized fundraising events, including charity balls and subscription dinners, that attracted wealthy acquaintances and visiting Americans. These occasions provided opportunities for the cultivation of influential contacts, but also served practical functions in offsetting operational deficits. At times, Jennie's personal jewelry and other assets were pawned or sold to address immediate obligations, a practice not uncommon among families striving to maintain appearances in the face of declining fortunes. Jennie's approach to financial management was pragmatic, and often required delicate balancing between discretion and transparency. She worked closely with accountants and legal advisors to avoid public embarrassment or the risk of scandal. Records from estate managers and solicitors indicate that she was actively involved in decisions concerning investments and the restructuring of family debts. Her ability to navigate these complexities helped prevent more severe financial crises, though the underlying instability remained a constant feature of Churchill family life. The necessity of maintaining outward displays of prosperity intensified the pressures on Jennie's efforts. Entertaining, travel, and the seasonal rhythms of the London social calendar imposed significant demands, with failure to meet expectations carrying reputational costs that could extend to political as well as personal domains. Jennie's resourcefulness in securing supplemental funding and managing the optics of household expenditure enabled the Churchills to sustain their position among the aristocratic elite. By the late 1880s, the cumulative effects of these financial pressures had become apparent. The strategies Jennie employed delayed, but did not eliminate, the underlying structural problems faced by the family. The experience of continuous negotiation, whether with creditors, family members, or social networks, established a framework for Jennie's later independence and adaptability. These financial challenges, documented in surviving ledgers, correspondence, and legal records, were not unique to the Churchills, but typified the realities confronted by many British aristocratic households in an era of shifting economic and social foundations. The final years of the 1880s marked a period of growing uncertainty for the Churchill family as Lord Randolph Churchill's health began to decline with increasing rapidity. Contemporary medical notes and private correspondence record episodes of physical and mental distress, with symptoms including fatigue, mood swings, and diminished cognitive function. By late 1886, these health challenges had begun to interfere with Lord Randolph's political obligations. His abrupt resignation as Chancellor of the Exchequer and leader of the House of Commons in December of that year signaled the onset of a terminal phase, drawing public attention and speculation about the causes of his withdrawal from national politics. For Jennie, this period brought an abrupt shift in household dynamics and personal responsibility. The management of Lord Randolph's illness required regular consultation with leading physicians and adherence to a regimen of rest and treatment that limited his public and private activity. Jennie acted as principal intermediary between her husband and external contacts, coordinating visits, managing correspondence, and overseeing the transition of responsibilities to trusted advisors. The family's movements, documented in travel records and diaries, became increasingly dictated by medical necessity rather than social or political obligation. The financial consequences of Lord Randolph's incapacity became immediately apparent. With his parliamentary salary discontinued and ongoing expenses for medical care and household operations, Jennie was forced to implement further austerity measures. She reduced staff, consolidated living arrangements, and solicited additional support from American relatives. The practical realities of diminished income and mounting debts required frequent communication with estate managers, creditors, and legal representatives who documented the stringency of the adjustments imposed during this period. As Lord Randolph's condition deteriorated through 1894, the strain on the family increased. Jennie's role expanded to include not only care for her husband but also the supervision of her son's education and welfare. Winston, by then a student at Harrow and subsequently Sandhurst, maintained a regular correspondence with his mother, seeking guidance on both academic and personal matters. Jennie's ability to provide stability during this uncertain period was noted by friends and associates, who referenced her organizational skill and determination in letters and memoirs. Lord Randolph Churchill died on the 24th of January 1895, at the age of 45. His death was reported widely in the British and American press, with obituaries chronicling his career and speculating on the nature of his illness. The legal settlement of his estate revealed the extent of the family's financial difficulties, with outstanding obligations requiring the sale or mortgaging of assets. Jennie, at 41, assumed the status of widow with reduced financial means but a strong commitment to securing the futures of her sons. The aftermath of Lord Randolph's death marked a period of redefinition for Jennie. She oversaw the completion of estate administration, worked to honor remaining debts, and explored avenues for supplementing her income through writing, editorial projects, and social introductions. The transition from wife of a prominent statesman to a single head of household required a recalibration of public and private identities. The adjustments Jennie made during this period established patterns of resilience, adaptability, and self-sufficiency that would characterize her subsequent roles in both family and society. This period of loss and adaptation also set the stage for the next phase in Jennie's life, as she shifted focus toward facilitating her son's advancement and securing her own place within an evolving social order. The documentary record from these years' letters, estate files, and press reports attests to the challenges and changes Jennie confronted as she navigated widowhood within the constraints and possibilities of the late Victorian aristocratic world. After the death of Lord Randolph Churchill in January 1895, Jennie Jerome's responsibilities as a mother assumed heightened urgency. With her elder son, Winston, approaching the end of his studies at Sandhurst, and her younger son, Jack, still in need of supervision, Jennie directed her attention to their education, welfare, and prospects. The Churchill family's diminished financial position, documented in estate records and private correspondence, made it clear that Jennie would need to act strategically to facilitate her son's advancement within the rigid hierarchies of British society. Jennie's influence in shaping Winston's early career was visible in multiple areas. During his final months at Sandhurst, Jennie maintained a steady correspondence with her son, providing both practical advice and encouragement. Letters from this period reveal her involvement in the details of his military posting, including efforts to secure a desirable commission and introductions to senior officers. Jennie's transatlantic network of contacts proved advantageous, as she reached out to acquaintances in diplomatic and journalistic circles for information and recommendations that could assist Winston's entry into public life. Winston Churchill's assignment to the 4th Queen's Own Hussars in India in 1896 marked the beginning of a pattern in which Jennie's guidance would prove pivotal. She encouraged her son to supplement his modest army pay through writing, leveraging her own experience and contacts to secure commissions for newspaper articles and books. The arrangement provided Winston with both financial support and a platform for public recognition. Editorial correspondence and publishing contracts from this period attest to Jennie's involvement in the negotiation of terms and the shaping of Winston's early literary efforts. Jennie also played a key role in facilitating her son's access to influential political figures and decision-makers. She hosted dinners and social gatherings in London that brought together members of Parliament, military leaders, and journalists, creating opportunities for Winston to establish his own reputation. Jennie's ability to maintain relationships with leading conservatives, diplomats, and prominent figures in both British and American society gave Winston a practical advantage at a time when personal connections could accelerate a young man's career. During Winston's deployment to the Northwest frontier and subsequent involvement in the Malakand Field Force and Sudan campaign, Jennie continued to provide logistical and emotional support. She managed correspondence with newspaper editors, oversaw the timely delivery of manuscript materials, and intervened when necessary to ensure Winston's achievements received appropriate publicity. Surviving letters, receipts, and contracts document Jennie's sustained engagement in the management of her son's affairs. Winston's rapid rise as a published author and young military officer would not have been possible without Jennie's sustained advocacy and resourcefulness. Her American upbringing, familiarity with negotiation, and comfort in elite circles enabled her to operate effectively within the overlapping worlds of publishing, politics, and society. Jennie's efforts also benefited her younger son, Jack, for whom she arranged educational and professional opportunities as circumstances permitted. By the close of the 19th century, Jennie had established herself as a central figure in the early careers of her sons, particularly Winston. The documentary record letters, contracts, memoirs, and press reports demonstrates the practical consequences of her involvement. Jennie's guidance, strategic sense, and willingness to leverage her social capital were instrumental in overcoming the financial and institutional constraints faced by the Churchill family in the wake of Lord Randolph's death. Her role in shaping Winston's public trajectory would remain a notable feature of the family's legacy in the years to follow. By the turn of the 20th century, Jennie Jerome, widowed for over 5 years, began to seek both personal renewal and economic stability through new ventures and relationships. In July 1900, she married George Cornwallis West, a British officer 20 years her junior. The marriage, conducted at St. Paul's Church, Knightsbridge, attracted substantial attention in both British and American newspapers, largely due to the significant age difference and Jennie's prominent social standing. Press accounts and personal correspondence reveal that the union was regarded with skepticism by certain circles of the aristocracy, yet it provided Jennie with a new public identity and reinvigorated her social presence at a time when opportunities for women of her background were limited. The marriage to Cornwallis West did not substantially alter Jennie's financial position. Estate records and household accounts indicate that her resources remained constrained, requiring continued adaptation and strategic management. Despite her title and reputation, Jennie did not possess independent wealth sufficient to guarantee comfort or social obligations without supplemental activities. She therefore expanded her involvement in literary and editorial projects, drawing upon her network of contacts in publishing. By 1902, Jennie had begun contributing articles to periodicals and newspapers, and was also involved in editing and promoting the work of friends and acquaintances. Contracts and editorial correspondence from the period confirm her active role in securing writing assignments and negotiating compensation. Jennie's social activities during this time included travel throughout Europe, often accompanied by Cornwallis West, as well as regular participation in the London season. These travels allowed Jennie to maintain her visibility within elite circles, cultivate relationships with influential figures, and observe the changing dynamics of international society on the eve of the Edwardian era. Personal letters from friends and associates document the social opportunities and challenges she encountered, particularly in balancing the expectations of her new husband's family with her ongoing relationships in the American and British upper class. The practical realities of Jennie's second marriage soon emerged. By 1912, the couple had effectively separated, though no formal divorce was sought at first. Cornwallis West's military career and independent interests led to extended periods of absence, while Jennie's focus remained on her sons and her professional projects. Accounts from contemporaries suggest that the separation was conducted with discretion and without public acrimony, minimizing potential reputational risk in a society still sensitive to marital scandal. During these years, Jennie continued to act as an advocate and advisor for Winston and Jack Churchill. She provided financial assistance when possible, arranged introductions, and continued to host gatherings that supported her son's professional objectives. Jennie's experience in navigating financial uncertainty, managing reputation, and maintaining influence proved valuable as her sons established themselves in their respective fields. Jennie's endeavors outside of marriage included philanthropic activities and involvement in various women's organizations, particularly in support of educational and medical initiatives. Documentation from charitable committees and event organizers places Jennie in a leadership role, leveraging her connections and experience to raise funds and awareness for public causes. These efforts, while partly motivated by the need to sustain her own public profile, contributed to the evolving role of elite women in public and civic life during the early 20th century. By the outbreak of the First World War, Jennie Jerome had established a new pattern of life marked by partial independence, professional activity, and continued engagement in the social and philanthropic spheres. The dissolution of her marriage to Cornwallis West, while notable, did not diminish her determination to remain active and relevant within the rapidly changing context of British and international society. The period closed, with Jennie poised to take on new challenges as the war and its attendant social transformations reshaped the opportunities and expectations available to women of her class. The onset of the First World War in August 1914 catalyzed a transformation in the activities and social expectations of Britain's upper classes, providing Jennie Jerome with new opportunities for public engagement. Drawing upon her extensive network and organizational experience, Jennie committed herself to a range of philanthropic and wartime service efforts. Documentary evidence from charitable committees and medical organizations places her at the center of initiatives that addressed the needs of wounded soldiers and supported the broader war effort, marking a shift in her public role from society hostess to practical organizer and benefactor. Among Jennie's most significant contributions was the founding and administration of the hospital ship Maine. Records from the British Red Cross and related agencies document Jennie's leadership in fundraising, procurement, and coordination, as well as her success in enlisting support from both American and British donors. The Maine operated as a floating hospital, providing medical care to casualties evacuated from the front lines. Jennie's correspondence with military officials and medical personnel reveals a sustained commitment to the efficient and humane management of the ship's resources and operations. In addition to her work with the Maine, Jennie was active in organizing and supporting hospitals, convalescent homes, and relief funds throughout the duration of the war. Meeting minutes and donor lists confirm her involvement in the logistics of supply, staffing, and event planning. She presided over committees responsible for organizing fundraising events and was recognized for her ability to mobilize influential acquaintances and secure press coverage for philanthropic causes. Jennie's efforts were frequently acknowledged in official communications and public commendations, reflecting both her effectiveness and the social capital she had accumulated over previous decades. Jennie's philanthropic work was informed by practical necessity as well as a sense of public duty. The war placed additional strain on her personal finances, and participation in visible charitable endeavors offered a means to sustain her public profile while supporting causes of genuine importance. Letters from contemporaries suggest that Jennie's leadership and resourcefulness were widely respected, with many noting her adaptability in shifting from society gatherings to the rigorous demands of wartime service. The social climate of wartime Britain was characterized by an expansion of roles available to women of Jennie's background. Elite women entered spheres previously dominated by men, taking on management of hospitals, volunteer organizations, and logistics networks critical to the war effort. Jennie's experience in negotiation, event coordination, and financial oversight enabled her to contribute effectively in these domains, setting an example for other members of her class. By the armistice in November 1918, Jennie Jerome had established a legacy of practical wartime service that supplemented her earlier reputation as a political hostess and social innovator. Official reports and post-war retrospectives recognized her contributions, and her continued involvement in post-war recovery and commemoration efforts extended her influence into the 1922. The First World War marked not only a turning point in British society, but also a significant chapter in Jennie's public career, affirming her capacity for adaptation and leadership during periods of national crisis. Following the First World War, Jennie Jerome's later years were marked by a combination of declining health, continued financial constraints, and sustained involvement with her family and public causes. Contemporary medical records and family correspondence confirm that, by the late 1910s, Jennie faced recurring health issues, including circulatory complications that periodically limited her mobility. In 1921, a serious fall resulted in a broken ankle and subsequent gangrene, necessitating the amputation of her left leg above the knee. This event, documented in hospital and press reports, signaled a dramatic deterioration in her physical condition and required prolonged convalescence in her London residence. The health crisis coincided with the enduring scrutiny of Jennie's reputation. As the widow of a prominent political figure and the mother of Winston Churchill, Jennie's activities continued to attract attention from both the press and the broader public. British newspapers reported regularly on her health, social engagements, and philanthropic interests, often referencing her American origins and prior contributions to society and wartime efforts. The tone of press coverage reflected the evolving social attitudes of the 1922, with greater acknowledgement of Jennie's agency and resilience, though persistent references to her unconventional choices remained a feature of public commentary. Jennie's personal finances remained an ongoing concern during this period. The costs of medical care, household maintenance, and charitable activities strained her resources, requiring further management of debts and, on occasion, the sale of personal effects. Estate documents and correspondence with solicitors reveal the measures Jennie undertook to secure necessary funds while avoiding public embarrassment or legal dispute. Her situation was not atypical among women of her class, who often lacked independent sources of income and relied on a combination of family support, social connections, and practical economies. Despite her physical limitations, Jennie maintained an active role in her family's affairs. Letters to and from Winston and Jack Churchill demonstrate her continued interest in their careers, personal well-being, and the management of family reputation. Jennie's advice and encouragement remained a source of support, particularly for Winston, whose political career in the post-war years involved both setbacks and renewed responsibilities. Her home in London continued to serve as a meeting place for friends, relatives, and acquaintances, sustaining her role as a social connector despite the challenges imposed by ill health. Jennie also sought to preserve and interpret her legacy through memoir writing and public appearances. She began work on her own autobiography, drawing on decades of personal diaries and correspondence. Although the project was never fully completed before her death, excerpts were published in periodicals, providing insight into her perspective on the events and figures that had shaped her life. The autobiographical writings, along with post-war interviews, contributed to a reassessment of Jennie's position in Anglo-American society and the history of elite women's experience. By the spring of 1921, Jennie's health had further deteriorated and she required near-constant care. The close of her life was marked by continued attention from her sons and a small circle of friends and staff who managed her affairs and supported her through the final months. Her determination to remain engaged, both publicly and privately, despite significant adversity, was noted in contemporary accounts and later biographies. The later years of Jennie Jerome's life reflect the interplay between health, reputation, and familial responsibility in the context of early 20th century British society. Her experiences during this period underscore both the vulnerabilities and the agency of women of her standing, shaped by historical circumstance, personal decisions, and enduring social change. These developments paved the way for the final chapter of her story. As family, legacy, and historical interpretation came to the forefront in the months following her death, Jennie Jerome died on the 29th of June 1921 at her home in London following complications related to the amputation of her left leg. The The sequence of events leading to her death was documented by attending physicians and reported in contemporary newspapers, which provided detailed accounts of her accident, subsequent infection, and the unsuccessful surgical interventions. Her passing at the age of 67 brought to a close a life that had spanned some of the most turbulent and transformative decades in Anglo-American social history. The immediate aftermath of Jennie's death was marked by an outpouring of commentary in both British and American media. Obituaries emphasized her distinctive career as an American-born member of the British aristocracy, a political hostess, and the mother of Winston Churchill, whose own career was already notable. Many accounts referenced her role in fostering Anglo-American ties and acknowledged her capacity to navigate shifting expectations for women in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Surviving press clippings and condolence letters demonstrate the breadth of her influence and the diverse circles in which she was known. The settlement of Jennie's estate revealed the continued financial complexities that had shaped her later years. Probate records indicate that her personal effects and remaining assets were modest relative to her social position. The administration of her affairs required the sale of remaining jewelry, artworks, and household possessions to satisfy outstanding obligations. The legal documentation of her estate underscores the material challenges faced by many women of her generation who, despite titles and connections, often found themselves with limited means at the end of their lives. Family correspondence and official records show that her funeral was conducted with appropriate dignity and attended by close relatives, friends, and public figures from both Britain and the United States. Winston Churchill, then already a prominent political figure, delivered remarks that highlighted both his mother's strengths and the difficulties she had overcome. The event provided an opportunity for both private reflection and public recognition of Jennie's unique place in transatlantic history. In the weeks following her death, reminiscences appeared in periodicals and memoirs from contemporaries who had known Jennie in a variety of capacities. These recollections, often based on first-hand encounters, documented her intelligence, adaptability, and talent for sustaining relationships across social, political, and national boundaries. The portrait that emerged was one of a woman who, despite recurring adversity and persistent scrutiny, exercised a degree of agency and influence not always associated with women of her time. Jennie's passing also prompted a re-evaluation of her impact on the Churchill family and, by extension, on British political life. The immediate task of winding up her affairs and memorializing her achievements set the stage for the next generation to interpret her legacy. The consequences of her death, both practical and symbolic, underscored the complexities of status, gender, and financial security in the closing era of the British aristocracy. This moment of transition would soon be reflected in the continuing public and scholarly assessment of her role in the history of two nations. In the years following Jennie Jerome's death, the process of historical and public reassessment began to take shape, informed by the evolving priorities of both academic scholarship and popular biography. Early accounts of Jennie's life, including obituaries and memorial essays published in the 1920 seconds and 1930 seconds, often focused on her notoriety as an American who had penetrated the closed world of the British aristocracy. These narratives highlighted her beauty, wit, and social influence, drawing on the recollections of contemporaries and the ongoing prominence of her son, Winston Churchill. By the mid-20th century, the rise of biographical literature centered on Winston Churchill brought renewed attention to Jennie's formative role in his life and career. Memoirs by family members, including Winston's own writings, established a narrative in which Jennie figured as both a source of inspiration and a provider of practical support. Scholars analyzed her extensive correspondence, drawing attention to her guidance in Winston's education, military assignments, and early political efforts. These findings, substantiated by family archives and private letters, shifted the emphasis from Jennie's social reputation to her tangible influence on British political history. The development of women's history as a scholarly discipline in the 1970 seconds and 1980 seconds led to further re-examination of Jennie's significance. Academic studies assessed her experience as representative of a larger phenomenon: the integration of American wealth into European aristocracy and the changing roles of women in elite transatlantic society. Researchers placed Jennie within the context of migration, class formation, and the negotiation of gendered expectations. Monographs, articles, and conference presentations drew upon legal documents, estate records, and press coverage to provide a more nuanced account of her agency, constraints, and adaptability. Jennie's reputation continued to evolve in the early 21st century, with new biographies and popular histories presenting a complex portrait that combined her public persona with analysis of her private struggles. The use of newly accessible archival material, including diaries and personal effects, enabled authors to address previous gaps in the documentary record. Recent publications have focused on Jennie's financial management, her professional ventures in writing and philanthropy, and her navigation of social scandal and loss. The reassessment of Jennie Jerome's life has also been shaped by changing cultural attitudes toward marriage, autonomy, and the role of women in public life. Historians have acknowledged both the opportunities and the limitations she faced, situating her achievements within the broader processes of social mobility and institutional transformation in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The evolution of her reputation reflects not only the interests of successive generations but also the persistent relevance of her experiences for understanding the intersections of gender, class, and power. By the centenary of her death, Jennie's legacy was recognized in exhibitions, documentaries, and academic symposia that explored her impact on Anglo-American relations and the Churchill family. The process of re-evaluation continues, supported by an expanding documentary base and the ongoing interest in her descendants' contributions to British and global history. This phase of reflection underscores the importance of documentary evidence and critical inquiry in reconstructing the lives of women whose significance extends beyond the boundaries of conventional historical narratives. As Winston Churchill's political career developed during the early 20th century, the significance of Jennie Jerome's maternal influence became increasingly apparent to both contemporaries and historians. The archival record, including correspondence between mother and son, as well as memoirs and political diaries, substantiates the assertion that Jennie's guidance, support, and network of contacts played a critical role in shaping Winston's ambitions and public trajectory. While early accounts of Winston's life often highlighted paternal lineage and schooling, more thorough analysis of primary sources revealed Jennie's consistent engagement in his education, career decisions, and public image. During Winston's initial forays into journalism and the military, Jennie provided not only financial assistance but also practical advice about negotiating contracts, cultivating relationships with editors, and capitalizing on opportunities for advancement. Letters exchanged in the late 1892s and early 1900s demonstrate Jennie's role in facilitating introductions to prominent individuals in publishing, politics, and the diplomatic corps. Her own experience as a social organizer and political hostess informed her recommendations regarding strategy, presentation, and the importance of adaptability in the competitive environments of the press and parliament. Jennie's contributions extended beyond logistics and patronage. She encouraged Winston to embrace risk in pursuit of larger objectives, a stance reflected in her willingness to support his controversial decisions, such as his shift from the Conservative to the Liberal Party in 1904. Surviving correspondence indicates that Jennie provided reassurance during periods of public criticism and electoral defeat, emphasizing resilience and the cultivation of allies. Her understanding of political volatility, shaped by her experience in late Victorian society, proved relevant as Winston encountered both triumph and setback throughout his career. Winston Churchill's own writings, including his autobiography and personal reminiscences, frequently acknowledged the formative impact of his mother's example. He described Jennie as a source of energy and encouragement, crediting her with fostering his intellectual curiosity and willingness to challenge convention. The documentary record also reveals occasions where Jennie intervened to diffuse political tensions, mediate conflicts within the Churchill family, and arrange practical support during moments of financial or reputational difficulty. Historians analyzing the Churchill archives have emphasized the extent to which Jennie's influence was structural as well as personal. By maintaining the family's connections across the aristocracy, press, and international diplomatic networks, she provided Winston with a platform unavailable to most contemporaries. The intergenerational transfer of social capital, skills, and reputation, is now recognized as a key factor in his ascent to national prominence. As Winston Churchill achieved higher office, including his tenure as First Lord of the Admiralty, and later, as Prime Minister, public discussion of Jennie's role became more frequent. Biographers, journalists, and political commentators cited her as an architect of ambition and adaptability, situating her within the larger narrative of the Churchill family's contribution to British and world history. The enduring documentary evidence of Jennie's influence continues to inform both scholarly and popular assessments of Winston Churchill's character, strategy, and capacity for reinvention throughout his decades-long public life. Jennie Jerome's marriage to Lord Randolph Churchill and her subsequent life within the British aristocracy embodied a pivotal moment in the evolution of Anglo-American relations at the turn of the 20th century. The integration of American wealth with British titles was not unique to the Jerome-Churchill alliance, yet the prominence of the individuals involved and the visibility of their descendants, particularly Winston Churchill, elevated this union to international significance. Contemporary diplomatic correspondence and press analysis identified the strategic and symbolic value of such marriages, which facilitated the exchange of financial resources, cultural values, and social influence between the two nations. The economic underpinnings of these transatlantic unions were well documented. American heiresses brought substantial dowries and liquidity to British families, often burdened by large estates but insufficient income. The Jeromes' financial support to the Churchills exemplified the practical arrangements that underwrote many such marriages. Estate records, legal contracts, and personal correspondence demonstrate the direct impact of American capital in preserving, restoring, or expanding British properties. In return, American families received the social legitimacy conferred by association with long-standing British institutions and titles. Jennie's active participation in both societies allowed her to serve as an informal ambassador between the two countries. During her regular visits to New York, she renewed ties with American relatives and acquaintances, offering insights into British political life and providing opportunities for cross-cultural exchange. Her presence at diplomatic events and her relationships with British and American officials contributed to a growing network of shared interests and understanding. Reports from social columns and diplomatic briefings in London and Washington referenced Jennie's role as a connector, noting her ability to navigate the conventions and expectations of both worlds. The broader cultural ramifications of Jennie's life were visible in the changing attitudes toward women's public roles, philanthropy, and civic engagement. As she assumed leadership positions in wartime relief efforts and charitable organizations, Jennie demonstrated the potential for transatlantic elites to shape public policy and social reform. Her example influenced both American and British women of her generation, encouraging greater participation in the management of public institutions and advocacy on behalf of common causes. Minutes from philanthropic societies and wartime committees documented her efforts to mobilize resources and recruit support across national boundaries. The legacy of Jennie Jerome and her peers can also be traced through the evolution of elite mobility, transnational identity, and the gradual erosion of barriers to international cooperation. The children and grandchildren of such marriages often moved fluidly between Britain and the United States, occupying roles in diplomacy, government, and business that reflected the interconnectedness of the two societies. The Churchill family itself maintained enduring links to American networks, a fact regularly noted in 20th century commentary on Winston Churchill's leadership during World War II. By the early decades of the 20th century, the phenomenon of Anglo-American marriage alliances had helped reshape the social, economic, and political landscape of both nations. Jennie's individual trajectory, her ability to manage divergent expectations, foster collaboration, and adapt to the shifting realities of her era, serves as a case study in the broader story of transatlantic relations. The enduring effects of her life and choices remain evident in the patterns of cooperation and cultural exchange that have characterized the relationship between the United States and Britain into the modern era. The historical assessment of Jennie Jerome's life has come to occupy a distinctive position within studies of gender, social mobility, and Anglo-American exchange in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Over time, scholars have increasingly contextualized her experience within the broader patterns of migration, elite adaptation, and the negotiation of reputation across national boundaries. The examination of archival materials, estate documents, family correspondence, legal records, and press accounts has produced a layered understanding of Jennie's trajectory from Gilded Age Brooklyn to the heart of the British aristocracy. Jennie's navigation of inherited privilege and structural constraint was emblematic of a generation of women who brokered connections between new wealth and established status. Her marriage to Lord Randolph Churchill functioned both as a personal alliance and as a symbol of transatlantic transformation, exemplifying how American capital could revitalize traditional institutions while prompting changes in the social composition of the British elite. Historians have situated Jennie's choices alongside those of her contemporaries, highlighting the ways in which marriage settlements, dowries, and the practicalities of estate management were negotiated to mutual advantage, often under public scrutiny. The mechanisms by which Jennie preserved influence, maintained reputation, and supported her family amid adversity have become central themes in the study of elite women's agency. Documentary evidence shows that Jennie's involvement in political salons, philanthropy, and the careers of her sons extended beyond the superficial role of society hostess. Her capacity for adaptation manifest in her financial management, public engagement during the First World War, and willingness to pursue professional projects has been recognized as both pragmatic and innovative for the period. Scholarly analysis has further emphasized Jennie's role in the transmission of social and political capital across generations. Her influence on Winston Churchill, documented in correspondence and memoir, illustrates the intergenerational effects of maternal guidance, network cultivation, and the strategic use of familial resources. Researchers have drawn on these materials to explore the transmission of values, ambitions, and practical skills within the context of elite family life, connecting Jennie's example to broader processes of institutional and cultural continuity. The reassessment of Jennie Jerome's place in history has coincided with increased recognition of women's roles in shaping public outcomes through informal means. Her experience is now understood as part of the evolution of modern elite identity, in which the boundaries of national, social, and gendered expectations were tested and sometimes redrawn. Publications, exhibitions, and educational programs continue to draw on Jennie's life as a case study in historical adaptation and the complex interplay between individual agency and structural change. By the early 21st century, Jennie Jerome's enduring significance is measured not only by her association with celebrated descendants or the events of her own time, but by the continued relevance of her strategies for survival, advancement, and influence in societies undergoing rapid transformation. The archival record supports a view of Jennie as a historical actor whose decisions shaped and were shaped by the conditions of her era, a legacy that remains a subject of ongoing inquiry and reflection among historians of Britain, the United States, and the transatlantic world. Jennie Jerome's trajectory from Brooklyn heiress to Lady Randolph Churchill left a lasting mark on both American and British society. Her efforts to negotiate status, influence, and independence amid changing social landscapes challenged prevailing norms and contributed to the redefinition of women's roles within elite circles. As mother to Winston Churchill, her legacy extended into the shaping of 20th century political history, but her significance also lies in her own determined navigation of opportunity and adversity. Jennie's story continues to inform historical understanding of transatlantic relations, gender, and social mobility, offering insight into the ongoing evolution of power and identity among the global elite.